this talk is all about being inquisitive spiritually. So could you just share just a little about what those mantras mean
Okay.
in relation to Lord Dhanvantari? Is it like part of a text, or does it come from a text like the Bhagavad-gita, for example, or is...
No, it's I'll have to be completely honest. I'll have to research the origin of that mantra, but not a great start to the podcast.
Sorry, I've thrown you a
Um,
really hard question to start with.
so when I was studying in South India in Vedic grammar, it was the doctor, he sort of maintained that traditional aspect of Ayurveda. And before we would begin studying every day, we'd recite that mantra to Lord Dhanvantari. We would recite one to Lord Ganesh, the remover of obstacles.
Mhm.
And we would recite one in honor of Saraswati, who is the goddess of knowledge, of learning.
Mhm.
So I tried to carry that on. I will have to look up the exact meaning, but it's, paying respect to Lord Dhanvantari, Dhataramisham Vividho Shadinam, like he's a destroyer of ill health. But I'll find out the exact wordings and
Yeah,
send it to
no,
you
that's
so you
fine
can
because
send
I
it to
know
your
that
friend.
you. I think what's more important and most important when you're reciting any mantra or anything like that is the intention behind the prayer. And like so, I know you keep, for example, in your clinic, because my mum's been there for a massage. You keep a painting of
Yes.
Dhanvantari.
I have both. I have a painting and a really beautiful wooden deity of Dhanvantari. And even before I begin any talk on Ayurveda, before I begin my massage treatments for the day, I'll say a little silent prayer and always offer respects to him.
I think that's so amazing because often we see ourselves as the doers of our activity, and just that form of surrender and allowing yourself to be like a conduit or a channel of that knowledge is
Yes.
super
What
powerful.
one of my mentors once told me, so my main form of work is massage, and a lot of people will ask me, don't you get tired at the end of the day? And one of my teachers told me that as a therapist, I'm not giving my energy to the client, nor am I taking on the client's energy. I'm taking energy from the earth and I'm giving it to the client, and I'm taking the client's energy and giving it to the earth. And when you see yourself as an instrument, and even there's a wonderful author of Ayurveda, Dr. Robert Svoboda. He's actually the first man from the West to go to India and complete his Bachelor of Ayurvedic Medicine and Surgery. And he wrote in the beginning of one of his books, he goes, no doctor cures and no doctor ever will. Nature cures. The doctor simply acts as a translator to help decode what nature is trying to tell us and present that to the patient. And
Mhm.
when physicians, healers, anybody who is in a helping capacity, whether it's spiritually in their health, when you see yourself as an instrument, like you said, a vessel,
Yeah,
you become empowered. Um, and you have to acknowledge that it's not me, but it's coming through me.
yeah, yeah. I'm actually making a note of that. It's so powerful. I saw a few people nodding along and some thumbs up actually when you said that nature cure. So it's really wonderful that you shared that. And I think it's also it's a beautiful way to approach healing as well, because it can seem, especially looking at the traditional homeopathic medicine and stuff, is like a very sterile experience, but you're really giving your energy and transmitting that during
Yeah.
your practices, whether that's massages or other Ayurvedic treatments. I'm going to take us back a little bit though, just for anyone who might be new to Ayurveda on this wisdom talk. What are the that you could three things that you could say that might help someone who's new to Ayurveda gain kind of an understanding of what it might entail? Because
Okay.
it's so vast. So
No, but I love this question, and I'll tell you why. So I don't give stories behind everything I say, but this has a really cool story. So I studied, my first little introduction to Ayurveda was in Vaidyagram, which is a traditional hospital in South India. And every day for 3 months, I used to sit with one doctor and we'd just go through the texts. Then at the end of the 3 months, another doctor, he came up to me and he said, what did you learn? And I was like, oh, wow, 3 months I learned about the three doshas, the six tastes, and, the five elements and this and that. And he said, no, stop. He said, if you were to meet someone on the street that had no knowledge about Ayurveda, what would you tell them? And I was like, oh, I scratched my head. I said, I don't know. And he said, you learned three things. So he said, number one, know your digestion. When you know your digestion and you eat accordingly and you conduct yourself accordingly, you are in good health. Number two, nothing in this world is universally good or universally bad. So modern media likes to glamorize or demonize particular trends, foods, habits. You know, 1 year it'll be like blueberries are full of antioxidants. Take the blueberries, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Next one, you know, avocados are a source of healthy fats. Have avocados, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But nothing in this world is all good or all bad. It's how we take it. So if you have too many blueberries, there's going to be a problem. You know, it just because they're good doesn't mean you can have them all the time. And then the third point he said is everything in moderation. So it kind of goes on the back of that second point. But any food, anything can act as a food, a medicine, or a poison, depending on how we use it. So if you know those three rules, I'll say them again, because I think if you don't take away anything from today, know your digestion. Nothing in this world is universally good or universally bad, and everything in moderation.
Amazing. Just a quick side question. This is for me personally. Like, what's a good or bad amount of blueberries? Because I eat blueberries every day. I have like a very small little handful which I put in a shake or have with my breakfast or something.
That's fine. A small handful is fine. I
Okay.
mean, you have to use your common sense as well.
Yeah, of course. Okay,
Yeah.
great. So thank you for those. Know your digestion. Nothing in this world is universally good or bad. And everything in moderation, which those kind of two go hand in hand. So what could someone do to, obviously, I think we touched on this yesterday in our Instagram live, which thank you for doing that, by the way, it was great. Is like listening to your body's signals. I guess that's a good place to start with knowing your digestion. Like I know if
Yeah.
I eat certain foods that I bloat, for example.
So everybody kind of wants like me to say something really detailed, like, oh, take ashwagandha, or, you know, take this herb at this time in this proportion.
Yeah.
But like you just said, listen to your body. There's certain urges of the body, hunger, thirst, to urinate, to defecate, to sleep, to yawn, any sexual urges, to, I think there's 11 in total, hiccup maybe.
Mm,
I have to get, but the basic ones, like to eat, to drink, to pass urine, to defecate, don't encourage or suppress those urges.
right.
Like we discussed yesterday, babies are the perfect they're perfect healthy beings, because when they need to do anything, they just do it. They don't wait for us to say, okay, eat, okay, stop eating,
Mm,
okay, pee
mm,
now.
mm,
They'll do it. Of course, you know, they're completely dependent on us. But then
mm,
as we grow up, we don't listen to those urges. We'll eat breakfast because otherwise I'm going to be late for work. We'll skip lunch because so I can get home early. You know, I've noticed a lot of children, they don't go to the bathroom at school, or they won't go outside. Even adults do that. They don't want to, you know, use the toilet because they're not comfortable. That over time, it's not gonna, you know, just doing it once, of course, it's not such a bad thing. But when you repeat that process of suppressing the body's natural urges, it can lead to disease later on in life.
mm. That's really useful, and it's a great segue onto the question of like this day and age, especially for those of us who are living, city lives or working 9 to 5 jobs, we're choosing convenience and comfort more and more over like a healthy and like a holistic lifestyle. And one thing I really love about some of the recipes that you share on your Instagram page is that some of them are really, a lot of them are really quick and easy, but you're also blending like Western kitchen recipes or foods that we eat growing up as children with the traditional Ayurvedic recipes. But what can you comment on that? The need for us to constantly, I mean, I know people like, on Deliveroo and Uber Eats and
Yeah.
all that stuff very regularly,
And
which is fine once in a while, but circumstantial.
unfortunately, yeah, sorry. Unfortunately, the world glamorizes convenience, glamorizes anything that's fast-paced. We want to multitask. We want to do everything now. We want it now. And it's moving us away from nature. It's moving us away from what is healthy for us. And I'm not perfect, and I don't expect anyone to be, but my suggestion would be just take a review or take a stock of your life, of your eating habits. Say, if we're talking about processed foods, how many times a week do you eat processed foods? And processed foods can vary. Like you said, it could be Deliveroo 3 nights a week. It could be frozen meal from the shops that you warm up for, dinner or lunch. Processed foods for somebody else could be you have fresh vegetables, but then you use a ready-made sauce. That there's a vast range, but do what you can in small baby steps to be less reliant on any type of processed foods and cook with whole ingredients. There's a really great book he's a food journalist called Michael Pollan, and it's called Food Rules. And it's about 62, it's a really, really easy read. And he just shares food rules that are very common sense. For example, one of his things is don't buy your food the same place you buy your petrol. So, you'll stop to fill up petrol and you go into the shop to pay, and then you might be like, oh, do you want anything else? He says, and then another thing he says, don't buy anything your grandmother wouldn't recognize. Don't eat food with ingredients that you don't recognize. And it's just really common sense stuff. So I would suggest don't compare yourself to anyone. There might be somebody who cooks 3 fresh meals a day with, whole foods, and make their bread and make all of their lentil soups, whatever. If that's not you, that's okay. Wherever you're at, start from there. So if you're somebody that, you have takeaway 3 nights a week, okay, next week I'm just going to do takeaway 2 nights a week. And 1 night a week, I'm going to commit to cooking a meal. If you're someone that uses a lot of, you use fresh vegetables, but then you use ready-made sauces, think, okay, I'm going to use up what I've got in my pantry, but every week I'm going to try one new recipe of making a sauce or making a marinade or whatever it is. So take stock of where you are and then baby steps to improve yourself.
Thank you. I really like that, the idea of scaling up or scaling down from where you are individually, because we live in a world of comparison too now, especially on social media. And so we always, especially this time of year, which we spoke about yesterday too with the New Year's resolutions, we always want to drastically overhaul how it is we're living rather than taking those incremental steps which have a larger impact in the long term. But I'd like you to get your view on, I know the importance of fresh cooking, and I think the word prana as well is linked to like yoga with pranayama and like the energy that food has. Am I right in saying that the food that you cook, whether it's vegetables are fresh, have a different effect on your body if you eat compared to if you were eating them the next day warmed up from the fridge?
Yeah. So in Ayurveda, one of the measures of vitality is prana. Prana is the life force inside of us. It's the life force inside of any living being. And with plants, like vegetables and fruits, the moment you pick it off the tree, the prana starts to diminish. The longer you keep it, the longer you cook it, the more you preserve it, process it, like frozen foods, canned foods, dehydrated foods, the prana diminishes over time drastically. So ideally, you want to eat fruit and vegetable that's fresh. Now, then people would say, why don't we eat everything raw? So yoga philosophy will advocate a lot of eating raw food. But the problem is most of our digestions in this day and age, they're not capable of digesting raw food. And so we need to cook the food. And yes, that does diminish the prana, but I'd rather eat a well-cooked food that my body can digest and I can assimilate and absorb the nutrients than eat something which is full of prana, but my body won't get anything out of. So when you look at your digestion, so I'm going to digress a little bit, but it explains something quite fundamental. In Ayurveda, like I said, your digestion is everything. You can eat the healthiest meal. It's organic, it's biodynamic, it's local, it's, prepared by someone with the best consciousness, finest ingredients. But if you don't have a good digestion, that food won't serve you it won't benefit you at all. So you need to work on correcting your digestion so that whatever you do take in, your body can absorb and assimilate its nutrients and its benefits. So yes, fresh fruit and vegetable, as soon as it's picked from the tree, it's got the most prana, but we do the best that we can. So if we eat fresh fruit and vegetable and maybe cook it slightly, that's better than eating frozen foods, frozen, peas or frozen corn. And don't get me wrong, I still eat, frozen peas, or I've got frozen mogo, cassava in the freezer. But again, do the best that you can. I'd rather cook something at home with some fresh, some frozen foods than eat something from the shop, because I've cooked that meal. I know the ingredients that have gone in. I know the intention with which I cooked it. And that also has a big part to play in how that food will affect you.
Thank you. And with regards to how the food will affect you, you touched on it just now in your explanation, but the consciousness in which you're cooking and preparing that food also has an impact on the way in which it's digested energetically in your body too.
Definitely. There was a study done by a Japanese scientist, Masaru Emoto, and he subjected water crystals to different types of music. So one of them, you might have heard of it before. He subjected to really calming, soothing music, and the other one to really intense, sharp, heavy metal type music. And then he studied the structure of the crystals, from both. And the one that was subjected to calming, soothing music had a very symmetrical, beautiful, structure, whereas the other one that was subjected to really heavy and harsh music, very jagged edges, asymmetrical. So in the same way, when we eat food that has been cooked with good consciousness, with the intention to heal and to nourish you, you can feel that. And it's a very subtle thing, so you might not feel it straight away, but over time, you can tell.
It's something which you do a lot. I've seen, whether when you go to the temple, a lot the food is what's called prashadam. It's blessed, where it's offered to a deity. Or I've been down in the kitchen at the Soho Temple in London, and I always hear they have like mantra music, kirtan music playing, which creates an atmosphere basically for the kitchen and for the food.
Yeah, and as I've like grown older, I love eating and I love going out, trying new foods, but I'm starting to find, I can go to a nice restaurant, really fancy food, and yeah, it tastes good, but I don't get that same level of satisfaction. I remember we had like a devotee at our temple in Brisbane, and he would make the most random pasta, and he'd put like Indian spices and, it was a complete hodgepodge. It was like a curry pasta, but it just tasted so good. And I was just so satisfied because it had been cooked with love and it had been offered with love.
Yeah.
And yeah, as I get older, I'm starting to not experience as much satisfaction in eating out as I would, a home cooked meal.
Yeah, 100%. I can resonate with that. I lived abroad for 4 years, and when I came back and I moved back in with my parents, all of the shacks and the foods which I wasn't even so inclined toward when I lived there before, I was enjoying everything so much more because it's cooked with love and that consciousness, and it has an impact on you.
Yeah,
People are starting to ask a few questions now, so I'm going to direct one or two at you. If
sure.
anybody does have any questions, please leave them in the chat, and I'll ask Niti. There's someone who's asked a question about gluten.
Okay, but
So
also No personal medical questions, if that's okay.
No personal medical questions, please, if that's okay. If you'd like to get in touch with Niti for that, you can contact her via her Instagram page, I think. So there's 40% gluten in wheat nowadays. Gluten is bad for us humans. This is what this person's saying. We have ghee on top of our chapatis to help our digestive system. And we know in Ayurveda, ghee is a very important component. So according to Ayurveda, what's your opinion on gluten?
Okay, I love this. There's a little book written by this Ayurvedic doctor, John Duard, and it's called Eat Wheat. And he's fighting the case for wheat because everybody is, not everybody, but a lot of people these days, they're like, go gluten-free, gluten's bad for you. The problem isn't gluten, the problem isn't wheat, it's how much we're eating. So he explains, if you go back Neanderthal times, like hunter-gatherer times, our ancestors were eating wheat in the winter. They would harvest wheat in the like summer and autumn. So it would store. And so during the winter, when they couldn't go out hunting, they would eat wheat. Wheat is more like it's a bit heavier to digest. And as I was explaining on the Instagram live, our digestive fires are strongest in winter. So it makes sense to eat wheat during winter. So if you look back at our very, very early ancestors, wheat was a seasonal crop. They would eat it during winter. They wouldn't eat it all year round. If you look at many traditional Indian diets, the same thing happens. In winter, they'll have other millets like bajra, which is called pearl millet. In summer, they will have something called juar, which is sorghum, another type of millet. And the problem is our overconsumption of wheat on a yearly basis. We eat it all year round. And our overconsumption on a daily basis. We eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So when you look at that, then definitely we will start to point the finger at wheat and blame gluten. And then there's so many other factors. Like I remember my grandmother telling me that in India, traditionally, you buy the whole wheat grain and it's stored in a thin film of castor oil. Very, very minute. It's, and it stops the wheat going rancid and it stops bugs and things like that from getting in. So then when you grind the wheat, it's got that tiny bit of castor oil, which helps with the lubrication, which helps with bowel movements, which helps with the digestion of wheat. So even how wheat is being processed, that's impacting our ability to digest it and break it down. So if we lived in a very traditional setting where we had the wheat grain, we milled it ourselves on a monthly, weekly basis, whatever is convenient for us. We ate it in winter and we ate it sometimes. Wheat is not bad.
Yeah. It ties in to what you were saying earlier about eating what your grandmother or grandparents would recognize. One of my favorite meals is actually bajri, like millet flour, like the rotis that you get from it. I love having it with like ghee and some jaggery. That's one of my favorite things. But that's something that like someone would have eaten in a village in India a
Yeah.
very, very long time ago. So maybe it's something within my DNA that's calling to it. But those kinds of things I think are important to remember. But yeah, like these days we have toast for breakfast and then sandwiches for lunch and then perhaps a pizza or something in the evening or a
Exactly.
wrap or something. And then there's the accumulation of that wheat. So that ties into the concept you mentioned earlier of everything in moderation.
So there are definitely some people that are diagnosed celiac. And
Yeah.
so, of course, then avoid gluten. But for anybody else that experiences difficulty when you eat gluten, take a step back, see how much you're eating of it. My
Sure.
recommendations would be have it more during winter. If you're going to have it on a yearly basis, have it for lunch because that's when your digestive fire is strongest. Have a lighter grain or millet for dinner time. And try and have, whole wheat varieties. It's better having a flatbread that you made yourself than having pasta which is store-bought. So also see the type of wheat that you're eating. There's also different types of ancient grains, ancient varieties of wheat that have remained unchanged genetically for thousands of years. One of them is called einkorn wheat, kamut wheat, and spelt. So if you want to experiment with, healthier versions, alternatives to wheat, you can try that.
And on that note, actually, this is something which my mum notified me of, but like the UN has recognized this year's officially, or not this year,
Last
2023
year.
now.
Yeah.
I keep saying this year. I've not moved into 2024 yet. Last year was the year of millets,
Yes.
which is it's almost like, when we start seeing turmeric lattes appearing in Starbucks. But these are foods that have been eaten and for a long, long time, but they're beginning to be recognized in the mainstream, which is great
Mm,
as alternatives to wheat.
definitely.
Another question. I have a question for you actually from personally, is that just how has your spiritual practice and also the wisdom and teachings of the Bhagavad-gita tied in with your journey in Ayurveda?
Um, okay, two ways. On a personal level, there's a section in the Bhagavad-gita which talks about the three different modes of material nature, and it also identifies foods within each category.
Hmm.
So, foods in the mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. And I've definitely noticed consuming more foods in the mode of goodness, which is your whole foods, fresh vegetables, grains, lentils, and cooking it yourself, it has a conducive effect, like we were talking yesterday, on your spiritual practice. So when I eat a home cooked meal, the next day I feel better. I feel, I'm able to wake up easier. I'm able to focus a little bit more on my meditation. Um, I think even in my demeanor, hopefully I'm not as snappy, or you can kind of feel it in yourself. And the second way is that there are elements of how do I put it? Ayurveda is not just about food and exercise and habits like tongue scraping or self-massage. There's also a spiritual element to it. Um, People may or may not be ready to understand that spiritual element, but I've definitely heard cases of, traditional Ayurvedic doctors in India where, people come to them for treatment and their treatment protocol may not be working like they hoped. And they kind of dig deeper into the patient, and then they figure out maybe they should consult astrology. Maybe they should look a little bit more holistically into that patient's life. I was listening to a podcast and the doctor said, I had a patient that the treatment wasn't making any difference. And then he consulted an astrologer, and the astrologer said, how's your relationship with your father? And he realized, it wasn't good. So subtle things like this can also affect our health. So I guess it's not directly about the Bhagavad Gita, but how how you conduct yourself spiritually, and spiritual elements also have a part to play in your health. And actually, there's an Ayurvedic text called the Ashtanga Hridaya. So in the beginning chapters, it talks about what you should do on a daily basis to be in good health, a routine to follow, scrape your tongue and massage and all of that. But then towards the end of that chapter, it talks about good conduct. So if you conduct yourself, and it kind of ties in the Bhagavad Gita, there are a few verses on the qualities of a saint, of a saintly person. They have humility, tolerance, they see everyone with equal vision. So those two, I think, go hand in hand. When you conduct yourself well, you have these good qualities. It also is subtly reflected in your health.
Thank you for that answer. I really resonate with what you're saying about sometimes the most subtle shifts which can have the biggest impact.
Mm.
And another thing was which you spoke a lot about the importance of digestion earlier on,
Mm-hmm.
and gut health. Like, is the gut, we know in science and biologically, is intrinsically linked to the mind and our emotional regulation too. Um, so could you recommend um, any foods or anything from the perspective of Ayurveda of how we could look to improve our gut health? Like I know, for
So,
example, my people in my family take powder, like Katrifera, for
Yeah,
example, with warm water,
yeah,
just like used as a cleanser.
yeah.
Tastes like
So
mud.
what you said kind of in made me think of something else. When we think about digestion, we always think about what we put in our mouth, how we're digesting that, and how it's affecting our body.
Mm.
But actually, we take in food through all five of our senses, through what we see, hear, smell, and touch as well.
Yeah.
So when you look at your digestion, don't just think of what you're putting in through your mouth. Think of what you're putting in through your other four senses. And how are you digesting that experience? And then the Bhagavad-gita also talks about how we utilize our senses and how the senses are kind of driving us in this material world. We're really tantalized by different sense objects, which make us desire after them. But we need to take a step back and think with our minds and intelligence and not just be dictated and guided with our senses. So when you do take in anything with your senses, how are you processing that experience? What are you choosing to see, hear? How has that affected you? How have you sat with that? So think about digestion in terms of all five senses, not just what you put in through your mouth. But going back to your food, for someone, some tips for good digestion, you asked, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that what you touched on with the senses is also really important. And it springs something to mind, and within my own experiences, I've always been a fast chewer, or like I swallow my food really fast. So one thing I have to be conscious of is chewing more before. And another bad habit is looking at screens whilst we eat, even more so
Yeah.
now. And so I really liked engaging all of your senses into the food. It's a big part of why Indians also eat with hands.
So what I was trying to explain was something a bit different to that is definitely engaging all your senses in food, but what you take in through your eyes, the media that you choose to consume, what you read, what you see, what you look at on your phone, how are you digesting that experience? How are you digesting what you've heard, whether it's a podcast, music, whatever it is, the radio? How are you digesting that? Making sure that you're taking in food, sensory food that is wholesome, so that your digestion has a better experience. So look at what you're taking in through your five senses, yes. And then the other thing with specifically digestion of food, try to eat your biggest meal of the day at lunch. That's what I would suggest, because our digestive fire, it goes in sync with the sun. And the sun is at its peak at noontime. And so our digestive fire is at its peak at noon. And so we should use that natural strength to our advantage, have our biggest meal at lunch. Number two, listen and ask yourself, are you really hungry from within? Which a lot of people can't recognize that hunger from their stomach. They'll eat because it looks good. I'm definitely a culprit to that. They eat because it's a meal time. They eat because if they don't eat now, it'll be too late later. They don't eat because they're actually hungry. They eat for a variety of other reasons. So the second thing I would recommend is start to check in with yourself. And before you sit down to eat, ask yourself, am I really hungry within my stomach? And third thing, learn to befriend spices. I'm not saying you need to make everything super duper spicy, but spices are medicine. And when you utilize them in the right way, you'll be able to digest your food a lot better. And they also have other medicinal benefits within the body. Each of them has their own benefits.
Right. Just linked to that, and also what you were saying earlier, could you explain a little bit? You spoke about the modes of nature, material nature, which is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, which are a mode of goodness, a passion, and ignorance. So sattva, rajas, and tamas. How is that linked to the food that we eat and spirituality? So like, are certain foods more prevalent in certain modes of nature, or is it the mindset and the consciousness we have in whilst consuming them?
So definitely certain foods that naturally lie in different modes of material nature, whether they're goodness, passion, or ignorance, they'll go on to contribute or affect us in that way.
Right.
If we eat foods primarily in the mode of goodness, we will be situated more in the mode of goodness. Now, it's not an isolated thing. So you could be a murderer, but eating foods in the mode of goodness, that's not going to make you completely in the mode of goodness. You know, look at everything in proportion, holistically. So yeah, definitely eating foods of that mode will help you be situated in that mode, if that makes sense.
Got it. Got it. And is there anywhere we can go as a resource, or like how we can begin to gain an understanding and knowledge of what foods potentially
I
pertain,
think there's I'm not that well versed
or like
in
any examples of food, like foods in the mode of goodness or foods
foods
in
in the mode of goodness. I would say anything, any type of whole food, food that is as close to its natural source as possible. So you're looking fruits and vegetables, lentils, whole grains, dairy products, what else? Nuts, spices, things like that.
Got it.
Nothing that's been overly processed.
Got it. Got it. Let's see. There's been a few questions about. This has all been really great so far. I've actually been taking notes along the way, so thank you. There've been a few questions about fasting.
Okay.
So, is it beneficial? And also, are there particularly ideal or optimal times to fast? And because intermittent fasting is like a new thing which is taking the world by storm at the moment. So what are your thoughts on that?
So fasting is great for some people, is not great for others. With anything that you come across in the news, treat it with caution and always see how is it going to affect me. What works for one person won't work for another person. So fasting is definitely a great way to reset your digestion, to get that real hunger going. Certain people will be better able to fast than others. And fasting doesn't just have to be no food or water. Fasting can also be eating less than what you normally would, or eating something different, like somebody that they need 3 square meals a day, and fasting is difficult for them. Their fasting may look like they might have a vegetable only meal for dinner. They might just have a soup or something. They might have a really light breakfast. So fasting, yeah, it's very different. It's a very individual based thing. So people with a slower digestion, fasting works really well for them, because anyway, it takes them a long time to digest. So when they fast, it's better, because most of the time they eat because they enjoy the process of eating, and the digestion still hasn't caught up. But when you fast, you give your digestion a bit of a break, so then it's ready for the next meal. But someone that needs to eat 3 times a day, there's those people that if they don't eat, they get hangry. They're like, yeah. So fasting may not work for you. And it's better for you then to change slightly what you eat for dinner. So you're just slightly reducing the load, still honoring your hunger, but maybe not having something as heavy as you normally would.
Thank you. And I suppose we're also individual in our bodily constitutions and energies and those kinds of things. But there are some questions which are coming in about herbal teas. So are there any herbal teas that you would recommend? And someone adding on to that is someone's asked what your thoughts are on turmeric supplements now as a thing. Is there too much
No, that's
turmeric
good.
that you can
Herbal
take?
teas are great. There's so many different types of herbal teas on the market. You've got, have them again in moderation. You can choose different ones according to the season. Herbal teas are a huge topic, but have them. There's nothing wrong with them. With things like turmeric supplements, I'm even going to go into, you'll be able to find like ashwagandha on the marketplace, triphala, everything, take it in moderation. If you are from a traditional Indian family and eat a traditional Indian diet, you're getting enough turmeric in your diet. You don't need to be taking turmeric supplements. Actually, taking too much turmeric can be heating to the body. Also, most of these spices, for them to actually be effective and available inside your body, they need to be coupled with a carrier. So turmeric needs a fat to actually take its properties and penetrate all of the tissues of the body. If you just have it on its own, it's not going to be of much use.
Mm.
So, and even with herbs, like the problem is that Ayurvedic pharmacy is very widespread. In a traditional sense, you should always consult an Ayurvedic doctor or practitioner to take any herb. Yes, I understand ashwagandha, shatavari, triphala, everything is available over the counter. But how it works for one person won't be the same as how it works for somebody else. Also, your method of taking it. Some people are better suited taking medicines with honey. Some people are better suited taking them with milk. Some people with ghee.
Yeah.
And only an Ayurvedic doctor or practitioner will best be able to tell you that based on your constitution, your current circumstances, and your state of health. I don't want to sound like a party pooper, and if you've got ashwagandha and you're taking it and it's making you feel great, good, it works for you. But if you're going to adopt anything else, just treat it with a bit of caution.
Yeah, yeah. I like what you said about that's a great piece of knowledge about there needs to be a carrier for these nutritions or these herbs.
Yeah.
So like milk, for example, with turmeric, like is quite an old, like I remember as a child having that a lot in the evenings, like turmeric and the like milk
Yeah.
as a thing. Um, someone's asked, do you recommend specific habits or routines when you wake up to do with drinking or eating, an Ayurvedic morning routine? I know a lot of people I don't do this. I drink water first thing in the morning, but I know of I remember seeing an interview of Djokovic and he said that he drinks water with lemon, warm water with lemon in the morning first thing, because that's I don't know, something to do with the alkali level in his body. But from an Ayurvedic perspective, I know it must be subjective to the person,
Yeah.
but what are your thoughts?
I would go against and go for a no with the lemon water because it can be quite harsh, acidic, and heating for the body. So just stick with your warm water. They were asking about an Ayurvedic morning routine, right? Do something which wakes up all five senses. So, or cleanses and awakens all five senses. So brushing your teeth to clean your oral cavity. There's an Ayurvedic procedure or practice called nasya. But even simply doing some pranayam to cleanse the nasal cavities, oiling your ears, oil and Ayurveda, they love each other. You can do a self massage on your body, cleanse your eyes, splashing them with a little bit of water, even rose water. So do something that cleanses and awakens all five senses. That's a good place to start with a morning routine.
One thing I really liked that you mentioned yesterday, and you mentioned it at the beginning of this talk too, is how we should be led by nature and behave in a way which is conducive to the atmosphere and the time of the year that we find ourselves in. So could you elaborate a little bit more on that, just for anyone who wasn't with us for the Instagram live?
Sure. That means living seasonally, like we mentioned yesterday about the New Year's resolutions, and people do a lot of diet restrictions, or they do a detox or a cleanse at New Year's. But in anywhere if you're living in the Northern Hemisphere, it's winter when it's New Year's time. And you think of what nature is doing in winter. Trees have lost their leaves. Animals are hibernating. Everything is dormant. That's what we should be doing too. We should be introspecting. We should be looking inwards. Our digestive fire is the strongest. So you don't want to be doing a detox. You want to be eating your heaviest foods. We had friends over for dinner and he was like, why am I so hungry? And I'm like, it's -6 outside. It makes complete sense that you're hungry. Eat what you want in moderation. But live seasonally, as spring comes, nature blooms, it emerges, everything's starting to grow. Spring clean, have your springtime resolutions instead of a New Year's resolution. Start anything new at that time. Summer, everything's, you know, that state of like passion and activity, go with the flow. And then autumn, things are starting to slow down. And again, we should slow down. In the same way, let your diet be reflected and guided by the seasons. You know, the same thing isn't available all year round. I mean, it's really hard now in this age of globalization because you can get everything all year round. So you don't really know what's in season. But a good tip is try to shop at local farmers markets. Try to buy what's cheap and in abundance, because that's usually what's in season. And you will also find your body gravitating towards the food that is in season. When I moved to England, it's very easy for me in winter to go for weeks and not eat any fruit. Because it's cold, fruit is cold, it's raw, and my body just doesn't crave it. I want to eat something warm and I want to eat cooked. But when I was in Australia last year in January and February, and it was so hot and I loved eating, that's all I would eat for breakfast, all the fresh fruits, because they were grown there. I was hot. I didn't want to eat anything heavy. My digestive fire was low. So I loved snacking on fruits. But come here, yeah, I can go weeks without eating a piece of fruit.
Yeah. That's a really good note. I think I've read Rajita Divekar says that in her book too. Is like eat seasonal and also wherever you are in the world, like eat local.
Yeah,
To like whatever's the challenge we have is like we have every cuisine
yeah.
on our fingertips now. But I think that's a really, really fantastic note. And a thought to end on is just try and be conducive with the time of the year and with nature. It's so important because a lot of the time we're using our willpower to try and will ourselves into doing the opposite of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just want to say thank you to you for joining today and coming on and sharing all of this amazing wisdom about Ayurveda because I've learned I've learned a lot and I'm sure everyone on the Wisdom Talk has too. So thank you for sharing that with us. Where can we find you? So if we want to see your recipes or if anybody wants to get in touch with you about any of your treatments that you offer.
So I don't do consultations, so please don't email me with your medical or message me with your medical questions because I don't do consultations. I only do massage either in Crawley or in Stanmore.
Okay.
You can contact me through my Instagram. I can, how do, should
Let
we
me
type it?
I'll type it in for you. Yeah, what is it?
@_
Yeah.
Niti, sheth, SHETH _